On the 6th of February 2025, the House of Representatives Committee on the Review of the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria came up with a proposition. They had received proposals for the additional, they had received requests and proposals from across the country on the creation of additional 31 states in Nigeria, bringing potentially the total number of states in Nigeria to 67. This forms the basis of our discussion today on Conversations with Azu, our weekly diary on life and politics, written by Azu Ishekwene. And this is aptly titled The Nonsense, sorry, Understanding the Nonsense About the Creation of States. And this, I hasten to add, tallies very much with the editorial of Premium Times today, titled The Reckless and Irresponsible Quest for New States in Nigeria. Joining me on the conversation from Canada via live Zoom is Azu Ishekone, the author of the column. Azu, you're welcome to Conversations.
Well, thanks for having me once again, Julia. It's a pleasure to join you virtually
I
from.
hope you're enjoying your
Uh,
holiday in Canada.
oh well. It's, the weather has been quite interesting to say the least. Couple of days of snowstorm, and it's only just beginning to lift. But as I speak, the temperature is still sub-zero. But it's okay. I'm indoors and comfortable from where I'm speaking to you. Thank you.
Very interesting. Canada is a federation of 10 regions. Are they called regions?
That's correct.
10, yes, 13 states or thereabouts. And it's been so for the past 50 years. Next to Canada, the United States, down South America, you have Brazil, and across the oceans in Asia, you have India. These are countries that are federations like Nigeria, but that have not created states in the last 50 years. Nigeria has created 36 states out of what originally were three regions. There was an additional region from the three in 1963, and afterwards there were 12 states, and then the number grew to 19, and it grew to 21, then it grew to 27, and finally in 1996, Abacha created an additional six that brought about the number we currently have, 36. Um, the agitations for new states in Nigeria, compared against the background of the examples I have cited, what do you think might be peculiar about Nigeria's yearning for more states?
Well, a couple of things very quickly. First, in the countries you have mentioned, in a number of them, especially in the US, for example, there has been the demand, although in a different form, for creation of one or two more states, I think out of California or so. But fundamentally, you are correct in saying that in all the countries you have mentioned, whether here in Canada or in the US or Brazil or in India, none of these countries, as far as I'm aware, has created any additional state in the last 50 years or so. And that's specifically because these countries, in my view, have found ways of dealing with some of this, some of the problems, for that form the basis for the demand for the creation of additional states. I think it's also important to keep in mind that in the US, for example, the way the union was formed is completely different from the way that the Nigerian Federation was formed. Okay, so you had independent, virtually independent countries, so to speak, giving up a certain amount of their
Thank
liberties
you.
and freedom to so it's a slightly different situation from what you have in Nigeria. And also that's also quite similar to what you have in Canada, different regions, significantly autonomous regions coming together to form a union of states. But even in India, where there has actually been some sort of deliberate effort by parliament to create regions or states, this country is neither in India or in Brazil have we had this sort of situation that we have had in Nigeria. And principally, in my view, the reason why we have had this situation in Nigeria, goes all the way back to the Willing Commission in 1957, when some some ethnic minorities especially expressed the fear just before independence, that they were going to be oppressed by the major tribes or major region as it was at that time. But unfortunately, that has, in my view, been abused. Politicians have made a complete mess of it. The military governments that you have mentioned have been able to get away with it because of the command and control sort of structure of military regimes. But they did this largely, if you go back to the way these states were created, well, some of them genuinely, but a number of them done at the behest of politicians. And the military obviously needed to do that to assuage concerns and to buy legitimacy. It was largely an effort in the purchase of legitimacy that the military did that. Well, of course, there were a few exceptions where you would say that was justified. But again, I'm sure that you have heard in recent times about the agitation for us to return to the regions. All right, so um, you just ask yourself whether we really, really are serious about what we are doing, especially given the consequential problems that follow the creation of states as we have experienced them.
Now, let's look at the fiscal and financial viability of the state structure in Nigeria. There are so many states that depend on federation allocation as their primary source of revenue. Do you think these agitations are taking into cognizance the fact that running a state is requires financial responsibility? Are
No,
the agitation?
no, no, no. I mean, it's basically a case of putting the cart before the horse, and that's what we do all the time. You get the state first, all right? Make the demand first, grab the state, and then we sort out the fiscal implications later. And that's why we're where we are. There was a study by Budget, which is the watchdog of public sector financial transparency, that said in 2023 that only four of the states actually are viable. The other states, over 55% of what they get as revenue, comes from Abuja. So if Abuja is in dire straits, as it obviously has been in the last couple of years, the states feel it badly. So I do not think that the demand is based significantly on any rational, scientific basis. Okay, it's just that feeling what you hear politicians say repeatedly is that they are feeling marginalized. But then you ask yourself, in a country of 350 ethnic nationalities, you can be sure that even if the National Assembly got away with the creation of additional 31 states, there would still be a demand for more states. I think the most serious and rigorous attempt at creating states under a civilian regime, as I said in my article, was in 2014 when President Goodluck Jonathan convened the National Conference. And I think that conference recommended the creation of additional 18 states at that time, based on certain parameters. In fact, interestingly, one of the fundamental points at that national conference was that the creation of states should be left to the six equipotent regions, because one of the points that the people who attended the conference, members of the conference, said at that time was there was need to have six, what they described as six equipotent regions. So then let each region, depending on its own need and depending on its assessment of viability, decide whether it was appropriate for it to create any additional states or local governments and how it was going to fund it.
All right. Let's look at the example of Lagos. Lagos State is the smallest in terms of geographical size in Nigeria. It's also the largest in terms of population. How much of these variables, I'm talking about in terms of geographical land size, and population. Do you think some of these propositions about state creation taken into consideration?
As I said, I do not think, as far as I understand the agitation, doesn't seem to me that there is any scientific rational basis for this demand. So and if you also know, and as I'm sure you do, the way allocation is made, yes, of course, one of the basis of allocation, apart from parity, is also land mass, and we also have land mass and population are also factors in terms of how revenues are. But you see that it's not always a matter of the size of, the population can be, there is nothing, population can be a good and a bad thing. It really ultimately depends on how it is managed. Okay, so um, in the case of Lagos that you have cited, for example, I'm sure that there are people who will argue that Lagos has benefited many years. By the way, it's one of the areas from which any additional state has not been created over the last 63 or 64 years. Now, there are people who will argue that Lagos started, of course, by being the federal capital, has benefited from infrastructure, which the federal government has invested in, and obviously, because of that, has had a head start over many other parts of the country. But it's one thing to have a head start, it's completely another to be able to maintain it. And I think we must also give credit to those who have run the state, since the period of Latif Jakonde, Governor Latif Jakonde, and a number of the things he did. Subsequent governments, especially the governments of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu when he was governor, built on all of those things. Because it's one thing to have a head start in terms of infrastructure or be leverage or advantage. It's quite another to be able to build successfully on that. And we haven't seen that example replicated in many other states. In my view, what I think the existing states should be looking at is to look inwards and think and find out ways of dealing with problems of social justice, if that's the cause of the pressure. And social justice, one of the ways that some of the countries that you mentioned early on in this interview have managed to deal with issues. You can never completely solve the problem of social injustice. But also, I think the more emphasis you pay on merit and competence, if you look more at merit and competence and create a competitive environment, then perhaps you'll be able to deal with some of these problems, which we always look for shortcut for by just demanding creation of state, which is like a pipeline to some free money from Abuja. That's really been what's been happening.
The pipeline to free money again. Talking about restructuring, fiscal restructuring, as it were. You mentioned earlier in your opening remark that there has been also an agitation for the dissolution of states for us to go back to the regions.
Yeah,
And on the opposite end, we're having this agitation for the creation of
for more
more
states.
states.
Correct.
How is this likely to impact the cost of governance? If, for instance, we dissolve back into the regions or we break up into more states, how does this impact the cost of
Well,
governance
it's
as we
it's
see?
improbable. I think it's improbable, as one of the members of the conference, Chief Ajibola Ogunshola, said in an article that he wrote in a paper that he presented in 2017. It's improbable that Nigeria will dissolve back into the regions.
Yeah.
It's very, very improbable. Whatever the advantages of that might be, it's very, very improbable that some that we would have a situation where everyone will sit down and have a negotiated return to the regions. Um, but yes, I mean, we are all very concerned about the costs. And again, two states have taken the lead um, how to, in terms of what you may call fiscal restructuring. Now, one state that has restructured significantly through litigation, restructuring by litigation, has been Lagos. So Lagos has made a lot of successes in terms of the laws that will give states change give states more leverage to be able to manage resources within their own space, whether it's water resources or it's land or Lagos has, and also it's interesting that in the last couple of years, the federal government has also made laws that will make it easier for states to invest in areas like electricity, like railway lines. So the thing is for the managers in this is to sit down and take advantage of some of these laws and see how they can make lives better for the communities, that they have responsibilities to govern instead of just asking for more. That obviously isn't enough, not nearly enough to go around. Uh, but states have obviously to look more into taking advantage of either restructuring by litigation and taking advantage of some of those laws that are already in existence, especially in fundamental areas like power and transportation, to see how they can make things better for people in the states.
And my final question, you contend in your column that politicians see in this an enterprise as it has become a regular thing since 1999 for every National Assembly to come up with a proposition for state creations. Do you think you are saying by and large that they are probably more interested in the politics of and the benefits
Absolutely. 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 I mean, it's just feeding the people false hope. And I just hope and pray that citizens understand and recognize that politicians are, playing the game that they have played in the last 25, 26 years. They're just, back in that game again. They travel, feed communities false hope where, oh, we are going to create more states, we are going to create more states. But they fail to, so that's what they're doing again. But I'm happy at the sort of response, the public response that has visited, that has met this demand. And I think right across the food chain, I'm hearing people saying it's just one nonsense too many. But I hope that this resonates to members in different
the
communities.
National Assembly.
And to the National Assembly. And I hope that communities also begin to hold elected leaders accountable for much higher standards. They are justified if they are demanding better governance, if they are demanding accountability, if they are demanding transparency, if they are demanding and merit and competence in governance. That's absolutely, But other than that, I mean, the only area I see any justification, if at all, for any, is in the southeast, which has been obviously shortchanged. And as I said in my column, it just looks like the way politicians deal with the southeast, especially politicians in Abuja, is just like a continuation of the civil war by other means. I mean, other than that, I do not see any justified or justifiable demand for creation of any more states in this country.
All right, thank you very much. Viewers, if you want to understand this nonsense about more states in Nigeria, read our column on the back page of Leadership Newspaper. Visit azuishekwene.com for this and more. And in a few days' time, Azu, precisely on the 19th of February, Azu will be
I didn't know
hitting
you
some,
were going to say
let's
that.
hit some congratulations to him in advance. Happy birthday in advance, Azu.
Thanks very much. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks, Judas, for having me.
So,
Enjoy the rest of your
Bye.
day. Bye bye.